It's also actually part of the data protection culture because, as I said before, the transparency is the main pillar. The right to know is very important. And I think the data tracker tool gives me the chance to be aware about how my data are used by the government institutions.
Welcome to the Digital Government Podcast. Tune in to discover the future of governance and ways of getting there. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Digital Government Podcast with your usual host, Federico Plantera, journalist and researcher. Today, speaking to a guest from the Data Protection Inspectorate of Estonia, the head of cooperation, Maria Kirs, who is here to tell us exactly about transparency and how that is done in the Estonian way. So, Maria, welcome to the Digital Government Podcast.
Welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
Indeed, today we're going to dive deep into the topic of transparency, but also into the topic of trust, because when we're talking about the data tracker, yes, we're thinking of a tool, but a tool with a purpose, and a purpose that is kind of like the same of why we have a data protection regulation in the very first place, which is to equip citizens and users with more opportunities and windows, let's say, to have a look at what happens to their data. Data today in the digital economy, but in any case in the information age at large, is ubiquitous. And we see it basically not just when we need to apply to government services or apply for benefits or whatever, but also much more in our really everyday life when we browse social media platforms, when we visit websites, when we have the cookie banners appearing. Data and the topic of data protection and visibility into what happens to our data is much more exactly ever present today than, indeed, as the word says, it ever was. So, Maria, let's start from exactly this angle, I would say, of data protection as everyday governance, let's put it this way, because Estonia is often presented as exactly, it is a digitally advanced society, but digitalization also means another thing. It means that data is being constantly shared, not just between the user and the government, but also perhaps between government agencies, or maybe between some private service providers and then also government agencies, and so on and so on. So from the perspective of the Estonian Data Protection Inspectorate, how would you start by describing the real state of personal data protection to date in Estonia? What do I mean is, what are the things that in terms of data protection in Estonia are working well, but also where are maybe some tensions between efficiency and actually being able to protect citizens' rights?
Thank you for starting from the most harder question for me. You see, I have such a long history with Data Protection Inspectorate and in the data protection field. And I can say that our inspectorate is constantly changing. Inspectorate was established like 26 years ago or something. And in 2018, the GDPR came into force and so on. There were some milestones, but actually during the last 3 years, we finally received some extra funding, and we were able to start with special departments whose main responsibility was awareness raising and doing trainings and communication, and not only for the data controllers and processors, but also for the data subjects, for everybody, And I think this was kind of a game changer because we used to be the smallest authority of Estonia. Maybe we are still one of the smallest ones, but actually now we have some kind of resources, human resources, to be strategic and to see the big picture. Because I can say that since 2018, when the GDPR came into force, the number of complaints and number of questions has not only doubled, I think it's tripled even, because I don't know, I think the reason is also that we are in the media very often. People know something about data protection, they have heard something, and this is the reason why we get more attention, and I think it's only a very good thing. So comparing with the previous periods, I think the knowledge of data protection in our society has raised, but also there is a very long work still to do.
In that sense, no, if we were to look a little bit in the, let's think exactly of like public awareness, no, of like personal data use, we see that that has evolved in Estonia, but also like elsewhere. So if we were to look back to the past years, what would you say that were maybe some key moments or cases or things that happened, you know, that really somehow shifted the way that people think about their data? And in these cases, it was more about like certain incidents happening, or maybe just like some trends more at large, like, I don't know, maybe about the ubiquitous advertising that we see everywhere, or like, you know, maybe talking about a certain topic to a friend, and then after 2 days, you see it show up in the sponsored on Instagram and so on.
Yeah.
What was it, basically?
I think the both ones are the reasons. Of course, there has been some negative incidents, data breaches in Estonia, and the very last one was last year, I think, if I remember correctly, and it was the pharmacy data leakage, which affected 700,000 Estonian citizens. You know, it's more than half of Estonians. And of course, it drew attention. And, you know, people started thinking, okay, so my data, my personal data, my name, my phone number, my home address, my ID code has been stolen. But so what else? I think we can't say what is the exact result of the data leakage, but of course there are going to be some results. For example, every day we can hear from the news that we have scammers calls, for example. They have to receive some data for somewhere, we don't know where. So, you know, the main idea is that if something is leaked, you don't know what happens next. And I think these kinds of situations has raised awareness because people start thinking what happened. But on the other hand, of course, connected with the social media or even AI, people are also see more data processes. They also start thinking, okay, why do they need my data? Is it allowed to ask me that kind of question? And so on and so on. So actually, I have to say that the number of complaints which we are receiving is actually smaller than the number of questions. You know, people just want to ask question. Is it allowed to do like that? And we also have a helpline. Not we don't receive only email questions, but also a helpline. And we receive over 3,000 questions per year. So I don't know, is it a high number or not? But it seems to me, when I have compared our numbers with our European colleagues, the number per capita is a little bit higher than in other countries.
Okay.
So I guess it's a good number.
Okay, interesting. And because this raises also, yeah, I mean, I mentioned in the introduction the topic of trust, no, which is obviously connected also to that of legitimacy when it comes to data or monitoring or compliance or government and the citizen relations. Some make it too easy, let's say, to get to the conclusion that, yeah, if there is data sharing with governments, then that is like some kind of big brother situation. But instead, when we talk about legitimacy, And transparency and trust, we're talking exactly about elements that should reinforce, let's say, that should strengthen this this relationship between government and the citizens. So the statistics that you mentioned, about the complaints and the questions, actually, I would say about this at this point more about the questions than the complaints that the Estonian Data Protection Inspectorate receives. What do you think that those numbers say about, for example, I don't know, do they signal that there is some mistrust going on at the moment, like that the increased attention towards data protection, even not in form of complaints but in the form of questions, like signals, I don't know, some suspicion that there is from the side of people, or is this maybe instead some growing confidence, let's say, in the fact that there are authorities that could do something about data extraction, whether that happens through cybercrime, as we mentioned, or perhaps actually just from using many of the platforms that we use on a daily basis? What do you think? What's your take on this?
Well, I think it's not a question of mistrust. It's actually the same reason, the awareness raising, because the data processing and data transfer between government authorities has always been the same, actually, in a large picture. But I think the knowledge and asking questions is become more common. So I think this is the reason why the number is raising, actually. I think it's a very positive, actually, because you have to know what is the main purpose of the GDPR. For me, it's the data subjects' rights, personal rights, And you have the main pillar of the GDPR is actually the transparency. Every person has a right to know what they are doing with what the data controllers and processors are doing with their data. So you have a right to ask, even if you are not informed. And that's a very fine thing to do, I think. And another purpose of the GDPR is actually it's a question of data protection culture. You as a data controller, you have to see a large picture. You just cannot think, I have to do some kind of privacy policy. Okay, I'll do it then, that's fine. No, actually, you have to map what kind of data you need and do you have a legal base for it? And then you have to see, is it a legal base? Is it the consent, or is it coming from the law, or is it something else? You have to do your analysis. And then you have to do those privacy policy documents and other documents. So I think the very big picture and is the data protection culture, and it's actually my favorite word from this year. and I think for us, my team, for the data protection awareness team in our authority, it's going to be one of the main purposes for the next years, to be more aware and to speak with the data controllers and processors about the data protection culture. Because you have to see the large picture, not only small parts of it.
Yeah, I think this is something we can say almost every year, but we every year go towards an ever increasing importance of data for the digital societies that we live in. And when I mention this, I don't speak only of exactly Estonia, but of the whole digital society where we live, in the sense, especially as artificial intelligence applications, and especially when the attention and the discourse on artificial intelligence moves from this moment where we've been talking a lot about infrastructure towards applications in society and the way that we use it and which tools we use to do that, then the focus and the attention on exactly this culture of data protection, this culture of I am constantly producing data and I'm a constant source of data. What is happening to this? And as a consequence, what is happening to me in the digital space? I think we could say, we could put it this way. becomes exactly ever more important. And it's definitely good that with governments, you do have a possibility to potentially exactly check what has been done with your data. And at this point, I would ask you, Maria, how does the data tracker work? Let's give listeners a little bit of a run through, I would say, not from a technical back end perspective,
Okay.
but if I am a citizen, no, and I go to the data tracker, what can I do there and what do I see?
From data tracker, you can see who has seen your data. You can see the log data basically. And as the main government databases are connected with the data tracker, for example, you can see who has seen your data from population registry, on what time, what date, and ideally there should be also the reason. It's also actually part of the data protection culture because, as I said before, the transparency is the main pillar. The right to know is very important. And I think the data tracker tool gives me the chance to be aware about how my data are used by the government institutions. So I think it's very helpful because, of course, according to the GDPR, I have also right to turn to the government agency and ask, sending email, what kind of data you have about me and who has seen them. But it takes time. From data tracker, you can see it right away, wherever you are.
Yeah, and I have to say, like when in the past I was working for a time at the Estonia briefing center, and we were giving some demos, like as speakers there. The data tracker was always like one of our go-to. I remember of our speakers because we could go there and also we could actually show on a big screen to others what was happening to our data. So like who was checking our data, and we can show exactly to different people coming from different countries with exactly as we were saying a different data protection culture, what it means to be able to see it. And I remember one of the most popular ones that we were showing was that the company dealing with checking the place of residence of people living in Tallinn so that you could use free public transport was simply accessing your data. You would see the name of the company, and then next to it you would see place of residence, and of course you can ask a question if you don't know what is the connection between that provider and the service that they need that information for. But then for the rest, basically, you could just see that and say, they're just checking that I can take the bus for free, basically.
Yes, you can, of course, you can ask questions. Why did you use my data? Or why did you look at my data? And if you are not satisfied, then you can turn to our authority. You can issue a complaint to inspectorate, and we try to make sure what was the reason or purpose for checking your personal data. But actually, I think data tracker is also a very good way to take down the fears. You also use the word big brother. Well, when we are speaking about the databases of Estonian government and also local government, there is a very specific procedures how those databases are created, how they are used, how other authorities or companies can have access. It's actually regulated by the law. And if it's not regulated, then it's not allowed to have an access or to process some kind of personal data which are not mentioned in the law. So all our databases are established in a very same way. And I think when we are looking at the big picture, this is also one of the way to build trust, because everything is regulated in very detailed way and it's not allowed to do something additional. Yesterday I thought, this will be nice new service, let's do it right away. No, it's not allowed unless it's regulated by the law and by the some smaller legal acts.
I think this is a very important point to note the one you just brought up, because maybe sometimes like equally in the same way as we read about Estonia as a digital society, we also read, for example, about Estonia's tech companies and like startup sectors and IT that maybe sometimes has this mindset, this like Silicon Valley mindset of like move fast, break things. But at the same time, when instead, at least in Estonia, it comes to data, yes, the companies can develop their products, they can do their thing, they can put out the platforms and so on. But there is already exactly an understanding in Estonian legislation, which means in Estonian state and in the country overall, of what it means to protect data and to actually have this visibility for citizens into the use that is done of their data.
Mm-hmm.
However, exactly, talking about legitimacy and regulation, Maria, as you were also highlighting, doesn't necessarily mean that there is a mature culture of data protection and a mature understanding, let's say, of data protection. So, one thing that I would ask you in relation to the data tracker and what you can do there, I will also mention, by the way, that the data tracker is available at eesti.ee. After login, so to basically every Estonian resident who can log in to access Estonian public services. And the question to that would be that there is also like a very practical aspect there, no? Like, so the presence of this tool and the fact that you can do this, has this visibility? So not really like the enforcement or like the oversight, because let's not call it oversight, because in the first place it is not that. In the first place it is visibility into what's happening to your data. Has this changed somehow citizens or public officials' behavior in some ways? And in what sense then basically visibility before oversight becomes a form of protection in this sense? And then we're slowly heading towards the end of this episode where I will ask you for practical advice after. But first, this.
Yeah, there has definitely been changes. I remember like 15 years ago, we had lots of cases where there's not lots of, but we had some cases.
Lots of
where
panic at the data protection
yeah,
inspectorate.
where Estonian state officials and, for example, even policemen and so on, they had access to the personal data to fulfill their job responsibilities, but they also looked at the data for their own interest, just for the curiosity. But nowadays, there are. Actually, I asked my colleague yesterday, do you remember when was the last time when we had some cases about the state officials, and they had to, she thought, and I don't remember actually. We have actually, it doesn't mean that we have an ideal solution now. No, we do have cases, but mainly they are from other sectors.
Yeah, there was
For
one of a
example,
doctor,
from medicine
no?
sector.
Yeah, see? Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
we were thinking of the
but-
same, I think.
Yeah, but when there needs to be, we have to do some more and more knowledge work there. And these the medical cases are not only connected with the the curiosity cases, but there are some accidental data processing. Typing wrong name. Usually doctors are in very hurry. They're always busy. Some kind of human errors are on the way. So we have to find a solution how to minimize those cases. But anyway, I think when I compare today and 15 years ago, then definitely there has been changes.
And in that sense, as I said, we're heading towards the end of this episode. So, a couple of practical recommendations, I would say. The time has come. So, Maria, for example, so for listeners who may feel that personal data protection is abstract or I don't know, just lives in the GDPR in Brussels like somewhere else, and or in data centers and servers in the US if they use I don't know, whatever LLM, let's say, and so on. What are, for people a few concrete things that we could do or keep in mind, let's say, uh, to feel that data protection is real.
I think the most important thing to remember is not to be afraid and ask questions. Very simple. Just ask, why do you need my data? Or when we are speaking about the social media platforms or with the cookies even, we are very used to just push the button, accept all. But actually, you don't have to accept all.
Yeah.
You can choose. So I think, taking the moment before you act, asking questions, thinking through the different path, this is the most important thing. Everything else comes later.
To be honest, like on the cookies thing, I've reflected on it like a bit more recently, like in the past 2-3 years, because for example, I don't know if the two things are like as connected as they are in my head, let's say. So I'm gonna take the risk of exposing myself. But for example, I simply saw that, when I'm browsing with, I don't know, for example, my Google account logged in, let's say, and I go from website to website, and then I get these cookie banners, no? And if you do accept all, then in any case, that is a moment where, yes, you are saving how many, 7 to 10 seconds, let's say, in that moment. But you are sharing basically your browsing data and your own data and information. I'm not saying like credit card information, but just your own usage patterns, your own media consumption patterns with a bunch of, they are so-called vendors, no? Or like partners, let's say, who have no interest in you as a person, as the person that you are. They're interested in presenting to you, like reselling and making that data circulate so that ultimately you can, for example, receive an ad that is for something that someone else on another website needs to sell to you. Or even worse, that, I mean, at least from my own point of view, even worse, that maybe you're browsing on social media and at some point, obviously now suggested content is much more present on social media platforms than it used to be. And where is this suggested content coming from? On what basis is this content being suggested to me? Sometimes you don't really explain that and you wonder, okay, but like what kind of data, what kind of information does this thing in my phone have about me to think that I am interested in, I don't know, purchasing a drilling machine or so on, and then this kind of thing.
Well, yeah. And in those cases, we are actually on the point that, did you read a privacy policy before accepting? And this is also one of the matter of the GDPR. Do you know that GDPR says that privacy policy should be easy readable and accessible? And I sometimes I ask questions. Please raise your hands who has read the very last privacy policy of the app which you used, and nobody.
Yeah.
So also very good example. I have teenagers at home, and one of my kids wanted to use a new app, and I said, you are allowed to download it only in case you read the privacy policy before. So he was very positive, of course, no problem. And he started reading it the very first 3-4 lines, and then he closed the policy and said, okay, I don't need this app. Because he wasn't, and not because this was a very bad way of data processing, but it was because he was not able to read the privacy policy because it was so difficult.
Exactly. So like,
and actually it's against of the idea of GDPR, which says that it should be understandable.
And exactly, explainability, no? Like now at the moment also when for example, like listeners, when you hear words like trustworthy AI, explainable AI, it's not that about data we wish to do anything different. That's one of the things that to understand. And the second is actually a practical check, let's say, that I could maybe suggest people to do is when you get a cookie banner, instead of doing accept all, take a look at what is the selection that you are allowed. And even if you don't want to scroll through it, just search for a number, which is how many vendors, how many organizations are interested in these 30 seconds that I'm going to spend on this website to read a headline and the first 2 paragraphs. How much data extraction is happening in these 30 seconds that I'm browsing this website? And sometimes you will see, we would like to share your navigation data with our 794 vendors. And you're like, who are these people? What do they want to know from me? Why do they want to know this from me?
What happens next,
Exactly.
Yes, it's... well, anyway, it's take a moment for yourself and for your data and read things and think through.
Maria,
what do you actually need?
Last question, last is what lessons at this point from Estonia? We talked about the citizens, but then when we speak of countries, when we speak of governments, what are maybe like 1 or 2 lessons that could travel well, let's say, outside of Estonia, that could actually be taken as lessons learned also in other places?
I think my key word is trust. Even when we are speaking about the government services, you have to earn your trust. You are not allowed to break it. And especially in the government point of view, when we are speaking about the data processing by the authorities, you have to do it just the way the law says, and you are not allowed to do something additional, because doing this, you are breaking trust and nobody uses your services anymore. It's bad for your image, I think this is the main idea actually. And when we are looking from the state point of view, looking at the big picture, everything has to be strategic, systemized. Approach has to be in the same way, because this is how you gain trust from the society. And this is one of the most important things from comparing with other things.
And this was Maria Kirs, Head of Cooperation at the Estonian Data Protection Inspectorate. Maria, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you. It was nice to meet you.
And thanks a lot also to all our listeners for tuning into another episode of the Digital Government Podcast. That's it also from Federico, your usual host, and I'll see you all at the next one.
This podcast is brought to you by the eGovernance Academy. Tune in next time.